This podcast is offered through the Sacred Community Project, an interspiritual collective working to lower the barriers of access to contemplative and devotional practices. Through the universal teachings of love, service, remembrance, and truth, SCP utilizes modern technology to promote eternal values. Learn more at sacredcommunityproject.org.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Baby Teeth Podcast. I am so excited to present this conversation for you all to listen to today. I had the wonderful opportunity to speak with one of my good friends, Seyij, who is a Baptist minister working at the intersection of faith and justice. Their work and scholarship are rooted in the teachings of prophets like Jesus, Buddha, and Audre Lorde. Seyij is the public historian for the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network,
which means I am in charge of maintaining and adding to the profiles of people, which is great because I get to interview folks, do some oral history work, and put their story kind of out in this hub of other stories and histories of LGBTQ folks who are across all faith traditions, all religious backgrounds.
And serves on the board of Transmission Ministry Collective.
When I start with Faith in Public Life, my work will be focusing primarily on the upcoming midterms and democracy protection work, as well as trying to begin legwork around reproductive justice, which is a new strategy, a new focus point for Faith in Public Life. Both of these things are really like near and dear to me and kind of like right up my alley. Even though they're different, they're still very much things that I care about and feel called to, long term.
They are currently finishing their studies at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. Leo and I had the wonderful opportunity to be able to meet in person in Georgia, in Atlanta, during my time there. And it was really wonderful getting to talk with them in this context about the intersectionality between different faith traditions and how, in one hand, yes, each of the forms are distinct between each other, but how beneath it all, we all really are working through the same struggles, the same hurdles. We're all working towards the same goal. And so without further ado, here is Seyij on the Baby Teeth Podcast. I'm Zander, and I'll see you next time. Ram Ram.
I've done cultural organizing work in the past, back in 2018, 2019. So, this is different in that I'm putting more of the oral history skills to work, but the idea of doing outreach to people in particular communities that have been underrepresented and being able to bring their story to a public space in this kind of way, is new. But the idea of culture keeping, which is not the same as gatekeeping, but culture keeping in terms of curating and honoring and preserving and making accessible trans and queer histories, is something that has been really, really important to me in my own coming of age and coming out experience. And I want more of those stories told, particularly of the elders in our community who, many of whom I don't know, and many of whom have stories that the world deserves to know. So,
Mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more like to why or how that was such a big impact. Speak to that concept of representation as a win. And granted, there's more to it than that, but I'm curious to hear about like in your, if you're willing to, like why or how that's been impactful for you.
yes. So I did not have the most pleasant coming out experience the first time. It was quite the opposite.
The first time.
And yeah, the first time. And I realized as I got older that a big chunk of that, aside from just not feeling supported and not being cared for and affirmed the way that I needed to be by my family, another big piece of that experience being so traumatic at the time was that I didn't have a support system in place to hold me. And I did not have trans or queer elders or people that I could look up to, even individuals that were just a few years older than me. So I started really immersing myself in the stories of people like June Jordan and Lorraine Hansberry and James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin. And then I came across Audre Lorde, and that woman has changed my life. And I realized then that I was searching for my place in the queer community by way of like affirmation from people who had lived before me and long since gone. So I think that's what planted the seed for me. And I also think that there's a parallel to that, which is the history of Black people in the American South and the stories that I would ask my grandmothers to tell me over and over and over again about their lives, about their struggles, the joy and the pain, and what it's like growing up in the South and raising a family and surviving. And in tandem with that is the rich history of Black religious institutions and how those communities worked in tandem for progress, for civil and human rights. So I think those two things are what have created this, what sparked, I think, my interest in this sort of work, but also my dream is to make projects that would continue to amplify and continue to provide representation, but also going deeper than representation and giving people that sort of popular and political and cultural awareness and education that can, I think, cross not only generations, but can cross locations. It can cross matters of justice. I think there's a lot of wisdom in narratives and the stories that we tell about ourselves and about the people that have lived before us, and about who we might be in the next world or in the next lifetime. And yeah, there's a richness there that I think can inform how we live. Yeah. So I think that answers the question, but all of those, it's kind of a gumbo of lived experience and also, a desire to feel loved and supported. And it's kind of interesting that I found that first true acceptance of my queerness in the lives and the stories and the words of my ancestors, my queer ancestors.
Mm. 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 And that is so powerful. And you know, storytelling has been the first form of communication in some way. And I think in a more modern context, it allows people to kind of be immersed and come up with their own syntheses in a way that you're not able to when you're just told about the thing straight up, or when you're told the lesson that you would get from the retelling of a story. So what brought you to studying and being in seminary school and being and intentionally diving into like the faith-based world and being both a listener and a teacher in that world?
I really struggle with that label of teacher. I hope that I can be a better listener, and maybe that is what makes a good teacher. But I grew up in the Black Baptist Church in Tennessee, and when I say grew up, I mean that was quite literally my second home. If I was not at school or my own house with my family, I was at church. And those days and hours and nights and weekends for years were the staple of my life. And to be honest, I don't have regrets about those years and that time. I do, however, wish that I had been aware of the fact that tension, of feeling so connected and plugged into a community, that tension would live with me for a long time.
The tension of?
Yeah, the tension of being in a community that affirms one piece of myself, but not the other. Another, right? Because there's several pieces to me and to you. And as a Black person who growing up in this church that has significant civil rights history in Nashville, I felt like these are my people, and that this was home. But when I became aware of my queerness at a really early age, and then learned not too much later that my pastor and my family were adamant that people like me were condemned and sinful and maybe even irredeemable, I felt like a stranger and like I wasn't at home. So that tension, I wish I had been aware of that, because but things happen the way they're supposed to sometimes. So over the years, I learned that I wasn't the only queer person there, and that many of us struggled with how to be our authentic selves in a space like that, where we could only really be part human. And yet we love the richness of the music and the worship and the experience of Black church. So yeah, I really grew up in the Black Baptist church, and something interesting about being Baptist that I think we've talked about before maybe is that Baptists are congregationalists. So decisions are not made from a top-down approach. There's no wider governing body that tells a Baptist church exactly who they can and can't be and what they can and cannot do. And so that's kind of a neat little caveat, because those of us who are trans and queer and just different, right, are able to still have a space within Baptist life because no one can take that away from us and no one can say that we can't. And if we happen to find ourselves in a church or a faith community that won't allow us to be who we are, we can create our own spaces. So that to me has been probably the most fundamental reason as to why I've remained a Baptist and stayed connected to my faith. I did, however, have a long period of just searching, and I think that is so healthy spiritually and emotionally. And I searching not in a defined way because I don't think that I've stopped searching. I want to find the divine or God or the great mystery, whatever you want to call it, in and through everything that I can. And so I had a period where I wasn't like connected to the church or even to Christianity. And I was just kind of exploring to see what felt real for me and what felt like it was life-giving and made me alive and was not feeling like I was being drained. And I ended up coming back to Christianity with a few caveats. So, like, I have this deep, deep appreciation for Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh and the tradition of meditation, which is found in every, I would say, major religion, but particularly the Zen approach to meditation. You know, if I ever get into a groove where I have a really solid practice and I'm in relationship with monastery on a regular basis, then I probably start calling myself Christian with a hint of Buddhism or Buddhist adjacent. But yeah, I do want to acknowledge though the real hard, undeniable truth, which is that all major religions, but particularly Christianity, has a very special brand of disregarding the human dignity of people. And that's real. Christianity has hurt a lot of people. And perhaps I shouldn't put that on the faith itself, but on the people that have used and abused and misused the Bible and Jesus's teachings to do harm. So, yeah, it's been a really intentional decision to stay in faith. But another reason why I stay is because there are people that I meet almost every day who are still surprised that someone like me exists. And sometimes people ask, well, how can you be gay and Christian or trans and Christian? But other times people are just like, wow, why? Doesn't the church, the Christian church, hate LGBTQ people? So I stay also for the people that I know that are coming after me, so that we're not an anomaly, that we're seen as just as valid and as equal and as important as cis hetero folks in the faith. Now how I got to seminary has been an interesting journey because I started back in 2016 and I left seminary after 2 years and took like a 3-year hiatus. And I thought I wasn't coming back because I wasn't 1,000% sure if I was ready to accept a calling. And to be honest, the calling can change and does change. So in 5 years, I may be like, you know what? Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be a faith leader or a pastor or a Christian. The calling can change because our path in life is so diverse and expansive, just like whatever that greater life force is that's kind of keeping us all together in this moment. Um, but the beautiful part about my story up to this point is that it was actually trans and queer people in a progressive Christian church that encouraged me to follow the things that I was sensing and feeling about spirituality and the divine, and encouraged me to look into theological education and to go to seminary.
Wow. 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 I really like how you're referring to this essence that you used, the calling, that terminology. That's been a part of like my recent conversations here at Hanuman Maui. A big part of my practice has been just being very conscious about the fact that I only have a limited amount of energy, and just trying to be very intentional about who or what I'm giving that energy to. And a big part of that here has been like, well, what do I even want? Like, what do I want out of everything? That calling that you're talking about, where I've kind of landed in the conversation is that concept of not my, but thy will, O Lord. And really just offering myself, my life, my voice as a conduit to that divine essence to speak through and come into form with and create through. But what I kind of would love to hear from you is just advice, or just what does it even feel like to like listen to that calling and to hear it and to really get quiet enough to even have a smidgen of an idea about what that calling may be in that moment?
That's such a good question. And I want to know your response to that too. Oh.
Okay, but you first though, because I asked.
Yes, of course. But just acknowledging even where you are in Hawaii and how you are responding, and in many ways, I think living out a calling, even just like right where you are in this moment. Yeah. So on that note, I should say that, or I want to say that the calling is not this daunting thing that I thought it was when I first started seminary. And it's not just this idea of purpose that my millennial self was thinking about in high school. Like, there's something great that I'm supposed to do in the world. What is it? But for me, calling has evolved to be desire. Like the deepest, most authentic, raw desire, or set of desires that I have for myself in my own life. And I think that the Bible, there's certainly scriptures and verses that back me up on this. One of my favorites that I learned in Sunday school, which we had to memorize, is in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. And it says, and I will give my own Leo Sage translation. But it says, trust in God with your whole heart. Even trusting God when you don't understand God. And if you honor that and you're faithful to that belief and that trust, God will honor you by giving you every desire of your heart. So calling has evolved for me into more than a sense of purpose, which can sometimes start to feel obligatory, and then you might start to regret that. It's become a sense of desire. And I know that my desires can and will change. But whatever it is in this moment that I desire from myself, from my community, from my family, my partners, my friends, from the world, from the divine, whatever it is that I desire, that's what I want to pursue. And pursue that knowing and believing and trusting that it is a divine desire. It's given to me by Creator, by the great mystery, so that I can pursue it. So in essence, my life and my calling are inseparable from the divine. Whether I am working in, a quote unquote secular space or a faith space, doesn't really matter, because those desires are divinely given. And if I am following that and being true to that, then I'm following the path that I'm meant to be on. So I guess in essence, my response to the question would be, as long as I don't betray myself and what's in my heart, then I know I'm following my calling. And I just think it's such a beautiful thing for people to realize that their calling is not a separate thing outside of themselves, and that it's something that gives God joy and pleasure when we are actually honoring the desires that God gave us and continues to give us. I think there's nothing that makes God more happy. Yeah. And desire is a tricky thing, because I struggle with that. I struggle with desire on so many levels, especially being raised and taught to think, and being conditioned furthermore in a society to think that what I desire for myself desire is bad, actually, just inherently not good. Therefore, if we follow the logic of Proverbs 3, if my desires are not good, then I'm not good. And if I'm not good, then my Creator's not good. And we go on and on and on, So, it's definitely not been easy to embrace my own desires. I have a dream of owning a nano brewery, and I don't know what that has to do with church or ministry, but I think it probably is ministry, because it's a desire that I've had. I desire genuine community, and I want to live in a place where, if the community that I'm seeking isn't there, I can form it from the ground up. That's a desire. And I desire to lead and walk alongside people in their spiritual journeys as a pastor. That's a desire. All three of those things are callings, and I don't see any need to diminish or even elevate one over the other. They're all beautiful wants and wantings that, I will be blessed and fortunate if I can even live out one of them. And still, the callings, the desires can change. And that's what I think is really beautiful about that. What do you think?
Amen. It is so amazing how you immediately went to that word desire, because that was exactly where my head started going with it. It's been a big part of this conversation that I've been having for months on end of well, I want this. Well, also not only in the general zeitgeist, but especially in new age spirituality stuff. if you're not like really listening deeply, you can get the surface message of, oh, desires are bad. It's like you said, so potent in the society right now. But really noticing and pulling it back and back and back and being like, well, even if it is conditioning that I want this thing, isn't even that conditioning like God itself, just in another form?
Mm.
And if it isn't conditioning, if I don't even know the source of it, then what else could that be than that thing there? Yeah. Yeah. It's been so the Hindu monkey god Hanuman is said to it's said that when you worship him, he will fulfill your desires. And so the other day, I was out by the pool with somebody who lives literally next door right now, Hari. He was a caretaker for Ram Dass back in the day. And this was earlier this week. Oh my God, time feels like so weird here. Beginning of my second week here. And I asked him, do you feel the presence of Ram Dass here? He said, yes. The other person who was a part of that conversation turned to me and he was like, do you feel the presence of Ram Dass here? And my response was, I don't know. I don't even necessarily have this something to compare it to validate that. And so Hari, the person who I asked the question to originally, was like, ask for it. When you ask, the clearer you can get, the more that the universe, that divine essence, is able to meet you there, because you are clearer and clearer in yourself about what that looks like. Yeah. And the other part of that, which I want to hear your thoughts about, is, and you mentioned this, having that trust in God. That word trust has been a big thing for me here. In fact, I was just reflecting, I don't know, a few days ago, that if nothing else, I feel like being here, I'm putting a lot of coins in the trust bank of just being like, well, I need to get somewhere at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, and I don't have a car that's mine, but there's cars that we all share. So like, I'm just going to trust that it's going to work out and I'll get there and it will be fine. Plot twist. I didn't even wind up going to that thing at 10. I wound up leaving like an hour earlier and going and meeting these lovely women, Leahu and Maydeen. They have this piece of land that's called Kukui Puka, which means essentially doorway to the light. It's like a shrine on like the top of a mountain. It's outside. And they had just happen to have like a volunteer day where you can come and help them kind of just like dig out some dirt or some grass and like help just maintain the land. And like, because this thing got canceled, I was able to go to that instead. And it was just this whole divine play going on. It's very beautiful. But this trust in God thing, I think, especially for folks within the queer community, because that term, the term God, has been used so frequently against such a core tenet of our being. Like, what does it look like to change the definition of what God means, to really like cultivate this trust in this thing that even when using the word God, it's just a term to like refer to something that's unboundable, because the second you bound it, it's not the thing that it is. You know, the Tao is not the eternal Tao. But yeah, I think you hear the question in there.
Wow, that was a whole sermon. I love it. I love it. Wow. You know, a few years ago, I had this, I won't call it a revelation or epiphany, but I had this thought that two things. One, queer and trans people have so much to teach the world about love. And then the second was that a question, really. What if the whole world realized that each individual has a closet,
Mm.
um, just like we do?
Mm.
I was like, coming out for me is not a one and done. It's actually eerily similar to calling for me
Mm.
in that it just happens over and over again. And I come out in new ways of being and living and thinking and existing. Um, so I think I say all of that to also say that while it is so true that LGBTQ people all around the world have been abused by this idea of a mean man in the sky that hates our very essence and is punishing us accordingly for being who we are. While that is so true, um, queer and trans people aren't the only people that need to loosen and take off the shackles of that idea of a punitive God and to free God from the boundaries that we've created for God, as you mentioned. Um, James Baldwin said something to the effect of, if God is not just and loving, and if God is not a being who will liberate us, then it's time we got rid of God.
Mm.
And I love that coming from a Black gay son of a preacher who continued to embrace and love God with everything and wrote so beautifully and fascinatingly about the queer and Christian experience in some of his writings. I find so much truth to that, but not just for myself. I want that for everyone, right? Um, I'm sure Ram Dass would want that for all of us to take off and let go of the notions that we have about who or what or how or why God is, however you want to name that, and to surrender to this wild notion that the divine lives in us and we in the divine. And then Thich Nhat Hanh would say, we enter our. That is such a wild and difficult idea for people to accept. But it's the only one that makes some sort of sense about God to me, because there's my existence, to think there's my existence, and then there's this other kind of like otherworldly spiritual existence that I'm not connected to in any way, shape, or form doesn't sit with me when I see my nieces on a Zoom call or hear a good friend just laugh and laugh and laugh, or step outside and hear the crickets mating. I just, to think that I'm separate from those things or people, animal and non-animal, like in this space, that doesn't make any sense to me. The only thing that does make sense is that I come from those people and those plants and those animals and this air, and that at the same time, they come from me, and that we're all mixed up and jumbled up. And I, it can be frustrating as well when I think about how difficult this is, particularly for Christians, when I consider in the creation stories, in both creation stories in Genesis, there's some sort of forming of humans from what has already been created, from the dust and the soil. And all of these things that create our atmosphere and these, galaxies upon galaxies, come before our being. And yet we're created from those very substances, right? Including the breath of God. So I scratch my head sometimes when, and I get sad, really, when I think about some of the preaching and teaching that happens that makes people believe that they are separate from God, that God is separate from them. That's just ludicrous. And also, it's a biblically unsound idea. So I rambled there. I don't know if there's anything of substance, but those are my thoughts.
This is a podcast. It's all rambling. It's a dedicated format to rambling, basically. Yeah, I mean, I hear everything you said. This guy, Maharaji, he is Ram Dass's guru. He didn't give a lot of formal teachings. A lot of the teachings that people got, that a lot of white Westerners went to India to get, was just given by the happenstances, the Leela, the dance, whatever was going on around him at the ashram, just the environment, everything was kind of working and burning through whatever they had to. But the one teaching that he would give over and over and over and over and over again is he would say sub ek, which is Hindi for all one. And that's something that's, I mean, present in everything. And on one level, you can take it as all religions are one. I mean, I'm sitting next to a Post-it note what is this? A flashcard. I don't know who wrote it, but it literally just says all religions are the same. They all lead to God. God is everybody. You can take it on the level of religion. You can take it on the level of like physical being. Like, yes, we're all feeding into each other. Like the grass is feeding into something, which is feeding into me in some way. I and this desk are one. I and the blanket behind me are all made of the same particles of matter and we're all condensed in the same space together. You can take it on this level of whatever I'm working through, I'm going to trust that I'm working through it in a way. And because there are other people going out there going through the same exact thing, and through that interconnectivity that is innate of the human experience, we're able to connect and grow together. Because without that, if you're not exposed to something, how can you know about it?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of different, my brain is like. So that being said, is there anything you would like to bring to the table as a part of this conversation?
Well, I know this is your podcast, but I really am curious to hear and learn more about what brought you to Ram Dass and your wider spiritual journey as a whole, in general.
Yeah.
And where you are now, where do you feel you are right now? on the path?
Yeah, that's a good question. Inform. So basically COVID happened. It was my senior year of college. It sent me home midway through the semester, my last semester. So it kind of wiped out any expectations I had left of like what I could expect from my life. Because right, school is almost this guaranteed thing, and there are kind of guaranteed experiences. And then for me, literally, if you look in my journal, on one page it says like things I want to do before I graduate college. Flip. COVID-19 attacks. So right there, it took the floor out from under my feet. So I'm home. I watched the show. The show is, made from a podcast. So they used a lot of audio from this podcast called the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. And because of that and how they put it together, it kind of just lit up my filmmaker brain, and I really enjoyed it in that technical aspect. And then so I started listening to that podcast. Now I was like, I'm going to listen from episode 1. It's going to be great. There are like 400 episodes. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I definitely did not get through all of them, especially because at some point, somebody came on and was like, oh, actually, we just made a Ram Dass podcast. Come and listen to that. And it was literally, I felt like I watched my brain be like, oh, I like this, so I will like that. And there was just something to the way Ram Dass was talking that felt very comforting and very like this sense of home. And then also what he was saying, I could feel resonating with me on this deep level that I had never really been able to acknowledge before, right? It exposed me to this other part of myself that, I don't know, I didn't really grow up super religious. Like my family is some kind of Catholic, maybe. Went to St. Peter the Apostles on Long Island. We lived down the street from the rectory. I would go to like Bible camp over the summer, but I was just going to participate in the community aspect of it and like connect with other people. It was never really the religious aspect. After I made my communion, I didn't go back to church until my sister made her communion 4 or 5 years later. And even like as a family, my dad is Jewish. He doesn't really even celebrate Hanukkah. He has an electric menorah he'll like spin the bulbs on, but that's about all the acknowledgement. He even went to Hebrew school. The only thing that really happens is my grandmother like says grace at dinner. And for a while it had caused me to really, not that had caused me, but I had actively chosen because of I didn't really have a super strong attachment to it. And because of Tumblr and because of growing up, knowing I was queer without necessarily 100% understanding that side of me yet, seeing still all of the damage and all of the trauma that was being caused from this thing. And really like just pushing off the whole thing. Yet I do remember like distinct moments of like turning to that thing and being like, I don't know if I fully believe in you, but like, if you're there and you're listening, like, listen. So I find Ram Dass, I get prompted in a very specific way to deal with the death of my family's first dog that happened over COVID. And because I was able to sit with it in this way, it just kind of like opened up my heart to even a whole nother level. Being here on Maui, being very immersed right now in more Hindu practices. So like every morning and every night we do arti, mostly every night in the morning, like one person will do it. So it's not necessarily as much of a ritual on that side, but every night after dinner, we will all proceed out to the temple that they built on the front of the property. There's a specific order with the ritual. offer the elements. We all are singing Jaya Jagadisha Hare during that. Well, Pranam, sing a Chalisa, Prasad stuff forward. And knowing that all religions are one based off of explaining this love thing, this thing that goes beyond like the emotional heart to the deeper like heart of the soul, the Atman, I guess what you can refer to it by. And also knowing that religion is just the structure, it's the method to which to access and learn to understand that space. So right now, what my practice looks like is every morning I wake up, and usually before I eat breakfast, maybe sometimes after, I will sit down with a harmonium and chant and sing a bit. I find the practice of kirtan really to just resonate with me in such a deep level. And I also feel like it is this beautiful thing that not only do I get to more and more learn and find specific aspects of it to work on and work towards, but because it's also a music performance, it has this extra layer of being able to share with other people in a different way and get them involved in a different way than they're necessarily used to. Yeah, that's all I can answer for now. And I have some ideas potentially about future projection, but it's just projection. So like, we'll see. I don't know. Actually, I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
Yes. I mean, that is so beautiful. And also the way that these spiritualities are colliding in the world right now. That's fascinating. And I'm sure that it's massaging you in ways that you'll feel for a long time, even after this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I've talked to a few people about them, and I'm experiencing this now, coming here with the expectation of like doing work and the reality being like being worked on. Really just like whoever's here, the situation, it's all just like, if you step back far enough, it's all like perfectly designed to make you face whatever is still like dormant in you in some way, which is challenging. It's not the most fun thing per se, but like, I guess it's necessary. And I guess I'll just trust the universe that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be because it's where I am. Drop mic.
Right.
Yeah. I was kind of going to ask this about the archival job, but I kind of backed off because I wasn't sure if you'd be able to, because it's a recent starting thing. But have you noticed like a through line between queer people of different faiths?
Well, I'll say yes and no, leaning more on the no because of the lack of data that the archives has currently. And there is a version of the LGBTQ RAN, Religious Archives Network, in the UK, and I'm sure in other places. But at the moment, I say no because I just don't have enough history to pull from. So the overwhelming majority of people in the archives are Christians or Jewish folks. And those who are maybe Hindi or Muslim or of another religion are more recent, which is fine because the archives are for those living and those who live on in other ways. So that's not the problem, but I do have run up against this limitation of like just basic information to pull from because such a small percentage of the archives are non-Christian folks. But I say yes in that what I have read of non-Christian trans and queer faith leaders is a commitment to pursuing and carrying out justice through love. And I found that to be true, like in my interactions with people like you and others, like people who believe or think similar to me, but also very much differently than me. That there is a desire that love shows up through action, and that justice is only manifest, like true shalom and things being made right between creation and humanity is possible only through love. I see that in some of the profiles that I've read so far. So yes and no, and I hope that next time we talk, I have more that I can pull from. And even in this conversation, hey Dougie,
I know, Lila's just they were like,
but that you would be able to shine a light on those people for me that we need to be including in the archives, whose stories need to be told on a bigger scale.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is we will do a part 2.
Definitely.
I think this is probably a good segue to like wrap up the conversation. Also because somebody's getting whiny. Can you hear her?
Yes.
Let me go let her out of the room really quick. I think that's all she wants. You want to go, Luna? You're gonna miss it. Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring to the table? Like in particular, like, I don't know, like a word of hope or advice, because things are like don't look great, like on the short term right now. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I don't have any advice. I think I can, though, maybe pull like a word or a theme from our conversation here, which is that I really do believe what we need to survive, which is no small feat in and of itself, is within us, because divinity lives in us. Always has, always will. So to live that out faithfully and to honor that divinity, I think the only thing that's really required of us is to stay on the path, is to, in the words of a Black womanist theologian, Katie Cannon, is to do the work that our souls must have. And to do that in a way that honors every good and deep and honest desire that's within us. I think if we keep doing our work and doing the work that our souls desire, that we will see and experience that transcendent freedom that we know deep, 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 deep inside of us is very real and very possible.
Mm.
Do you have any wisdom for me, my friend?
Do I have any wisdom? No, you're doing great. You're doing fantastic. Do you have anywhere or anything people can check out if they've resonated with what you've said or want to find out more about the things you're involved with?
I wish I had a fancy smancy website like some of my friends, but I'm behind the tech times. I do stay active though on Twitter and on Instagram. I don't post a lot, but I love to follow people, and I find that those images and words on both of those platforms help me kind of peer into the lives of folks who I may never meet in the physical realm, but that I definitely connect with on a soul level. So people can connect with me on Twitter and Instagram if they use those platforms, and it's just the handle is at my name, my first name, at Leo Seyij. And yeah, I love to keep conversations going there. So
thank you so much, Leo, for being on the Baby Teeth podcast. You can find out and watch or listen to more of this podcast at, pretty much a lot of options. Basically, just Google Baby Teeth Podcast or Instagram or babyteethpodcast.com. You can find anything else there. And I do have a little closing, I guess, prayer. May we recognize our intention to take refuge in the love of sacred community here, today, and every breath. From all that ever was, for all that will be, we show thanks to those before us and share grace for those ahead. Here, we exist only through this moment, grounded by Earth, Mother Divine. May we each recognize our own wings, woven out of love. See you next time.
wow, that was beautiful. Wow.
You should see the font I have it written in. It's very silly font.
Oh.